I'm not trying to move them all over to Xbox anymore. That's Phil Spencer just days ago talking about Xbox's new release strategy. This is after their whole no red lines approach to bringing games to other platforms and the record-breaking sales decline in 2024. So I think it's safe to say we're witnessing the SEGAfication of Xbox, a shift from hardware to software, much like Sega did after exiting the console market. And honestly, like Sega, I think Microsoft will ultimately be fine. But before the console warriors start celebrating, this isn't necessarily good news. If gaming history has taught us anything, it's that less competition rarely makes things better for us, the players. And in the long run, that could be a really bad thing for gamers. So let's talk about how this happened and what a good outcome might look like, especially for those of us, like me, with a massive digital library on Xbox. And I'm calling this the SEGAfication of Xbox, but unlike Sega's exit from the console race, this time things feel different. Sega was a major competitor to Nintendo back in the day. The Master System and Mega Drive/Genesis held their own, but then PlayStation showed up and well, things changed. The Saturn's complicated architecture and high price tag hurt it, and while the Dreamcast had serious potential, the damage was done. A lack of third-party support was the final nail in the coffin. But here's the interesting part. As Sega was stepping out, Xbox was stepping in. For a lot of us, the OG Xbox felt like a spiritual successor to the Dreamcast. They even had a similar controller layout. And Xbox didn't just show up, it competed, at least for a while. The original Xbox laid a solid foundation, and the Xbox 360 was a massive success, arguably one of the best consoles ever made. But then came the missteps. The Kinect obsession, that disastrous Xbox One launch, and a pretty underwhelming approach to exclusives and classic games. Xbox never fully recovered. And here's the biggest difference. When Sega left consoles, Xbox was there to kind of fill that void. But if Xbox leaves the console space, who's stepping in? And one thing that always set Xbox apart from PlayStation and Nintendo, I think, is that it never felt like it had the same desperate need to succeed. I'm not saying the teams wanted it to fail, but for Sony and Nintendo, their console business is everything. If it struggles, the entire company feels it. When the PlayStation 3 and Wii U stumbled, Sony and Nintendo had to fight to turn things around. But for Microsoft, Xbox was never the core business. As long as it wasn't a total disaster, things were fine. That's why, even after the 360 lost momentum in the last few years of the 7th generation, Microsoft doubled down on Kinect instead of making the kind of aggressive course corrections we saw from Sony and Nintendo. Then everything changed. After spending $75 billion to acquire Activision Blizzard, Xbox was no longer a side project. It became a major investment, something Microsoft's CEO and shareholders now expect to see returns from, and fast. And now, as Xbox shifts further and further away from hardware, with no clear replacement in sight, the consequences could reshape not just Xbox itself, but the very nature of platform competition. Xbox's move towards a multi-platform future has been brewing for a while. It started with Microsoft releasing first-party games on PC day one, which made perfect sense. Windows is their platform, and it provided a much-needed revenue boost as console sales struggled. Game Pass expanding to PC was yet another logical step. But recently the shift has become way more aggressive. Previously exclusive games like Hi-Fi Rush, Sea of Thieves, and Forza Horizon 5 have all made their way to other consoles. At first, Phil Spencer downplayed it, saying it was just 4 games. Then came the no red lines anymore statement. At this point, no Xbox game is off limits. It's only a matter of time before Gears of War lands on the Switch 2 and Halo shows up on PlayStation. And future Xbox published games are likely to launch on multiple platforms from day one. On the surface, this obviously sounds great. More people playing more games. In a perfect world, exclusives wouldn't even exist. But that's not how the console market works, and sales data is pretty clear. Exclusives drive hardware sales. If Xbox fully embraces third-party publishing, what's the incentive to buy an Xbox console? But Microsoft keeps insisting they're working on a next-gen Xbox, claiming it will be the largest technical leap yet. But for me, actions speak way louder than words. If Microsoft was truly committed to hardware, we'd see a clear strategy. Instead, everything suggests they're practically pushing people to other platforms. And sure, there's Game Pass and xCloud, but unless they make it dirt cheap to drive a big surge in sales, I don't see people ditching their God of War and Mario games for it. And with xCloud, they don't even need a console. The only other option I can see is if they build it more like a PC, running on Windows, allowing for broader game support, and even letting you use other digital stores. Without that, the same problems will stick around. Weak third-party support, missing major releases, and no access to PlayStation or Nintendo exclusives. Why would anyone invest in a console with fewer games and uncertain long-term support? And let's not forget Microsoft's marketing, or the lack of it. Xbox consoles have struggled to gain traction for years, and with each generation their messaging has only gotten more confusing. If they launch another console with the same approach, the sales will probably be worse than ever. Now, some of you might be thinking, why should I even care? Well, for me this isn't just some what-if scenario, I have skin in the game. My Xbox Live account is almost 14 years old, and I have a digital library of games I want to be able to play in the future. But with Xbox seemingly backing away from hardware, what happens to digital licenses and backward compatibility? This uncertainty is exactly why, despite owning both a PS5 and a Series X for the same amount of time, I've only bought physical games for the PlayStation 5. At least with Sony, I know there's going to be a PlayStation 6. I don't have to wonder if my games will still be playable in a few years. And for the past couple of years, I'll only buy Xbox games if they're play anywhere, meaning I can also play them on Windows. At least with platforms like PlayStation, Nintendo, Steam or GOG, I know my purchases are pretty much future-proof. There could be solutions though, like porting digital licenses to the Windows Store or maybe even other storefronts, but that means relying on another platform just to access what used to be Xbox games. And even if you don't share those same concerns, here's why you should still care. A less competitive console market could have huge negative impacts on gaming as a whole. Take Sony for example. As I was watching the latest PlayStation showcase, I couldn't help but think if Xbox had played their cards right, this generation would be a disaster for PlayStation. Had Xbox built on the strengths of the 360 instead of insisting on Kinect and the Xbox One TV approach, today Sony wouldn't be able to get away with so many questionable decisions. With no strong competition, PlayStation and Nintendo can get away with low-effort releases and questionable calls. Right now, Sony is leaning heavily on remakes and remasters while wasting resources on failed live service projects. And yet, the PlayStation 5 is still selling incredibly well because Xbox isn't putting up a fight. And Nintendo is just as guilty. Some of their re-releases feel low effort, while others seem overpriced at a $60 price tag. And because there is no real competition in the console space, they get away with it. So with all that said, what's next for Xbox? If Microsoft steps away from making consoles, does that mean the brand is doomed? Not necessarily. Just like Sega didn't vanish after leaving the hardware business, I think Xbox, or rather Microsoft Gaming, will be just fine. In fact, as the largest gaming publisher in the world, with a strong lineup of games and a growing multi-platform presence, Microsoft's gaming revenue could actually improve. Game sales, Game Pass subscriptions, and revenue across PlayStation, Switch, and PC might bring in more money than selling Xbox consoles ever did. But what about continuity? What happens to the Xbox brand, its digital ecosystem, and the millions of players invested in it? One potential solution could be licensing the Xbox brand to third-party manufacturers, companies like Asus and Lenovo, letting them create Xbox-branded gaming devices running on Windows. These could come in multiple price points and settings. After all, if Xbox is shifting toward a service-first model, they'll still need a Game Pass box, as Sony and Nintendo aren't about to let Game Pass onto their platforms, so Microsoft might have to rely on third-party hardware partners to keep the ecosystem alive. As for preserving backward compatibility and digital ownership, if Microsoft does leave the console business, they should offer some kind of transition for digital libraries. And that could work in a few different ways. Making every modern Xbox game play anywhere would be a good start. This ensures all purchases stay accessible on Windows even if Xbox hardware disappears. For older games not on the Windows Store but still available on Steam or GOG, a license transfer would be a dream scenario, ensuring you can still access them. And for social features including Xbox Live's friends list, achievements, and profiles, these could be integrated into Steam and in a perfect world even PlayStation or Nintendo's ecosystem. This wouldn't just make the transition smoother, but it would also maintain trust in the brand since the Xbox name isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Of course, this path isn't without its challenges. Licensing hardware introduces risks. Brand consistency and quality control across different manufacturers will be tough to maintain, and the more devices you have, the more fragmented your user base becomes. Fragmentation, especially with multiple PC-like systems, could complicate third-party support, just like we see in the broader PC market. And maybe it just doesn't make sense. Microsoft's long-term strategy might favor a full transition to software and services, making hardware licensing a less appealing option. That said, if Microsoft truly wants Xbox to remain competitive, this hypothetical shift to Windows-based systems could also push PCs further into the console market. And I'm not ready to jump on the PC master race bandwagon just yet, but if Xbox moves towards pre-built PCs, this could be the change that finally bridges that gap. Microsoft can deny the rumors all they want and insist that their next-gen system is coming, but at this point it's pretty clear that the Xbox we knew no longer exists, and its exit from the console race feels inevitable. Even if they do launch another console, it's hard to imagine it really competing with PlayStation and Nintendo. With only Game Pass and xCloud as selling points, would that really be enough to recover the lost market share? For a brand that introduced so many innovations and great franchises, it's disappointing to see how things turned out, even if it's largely due to their own missteps. And while it's great that more players will get to experience Halo, Gears, and Forza, it's kind of a bummer to watch Xbox lose its identity in the process. The biggest question now is, how will this shift impact the industry? Competition is what pushed Nintendo to reinvent itself after the GameCube and Wii U, and it was also what forced Sony to course correct after the PS3's launch. If Xbox fully steps back from hardware, what's keeping PlayStation and Nintendo from raising prices, leaning on remakes, and taking fewer creative risks? And maybe this is what it takes for pre-built gaming PCs to finally break into the living room. Maybe it's the beginning of a new era where consoles as we know them start to fade away. And I don't think the Xbox brand is dying, but I do think in a few years it will be unrecognizable. We'll just have to wait and see. And I'm curious, what do you guys think about this shift? Are you still planning to buy the next Xbox, or does it feel like there is no point anymore? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.